Okay. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fifth event of Transitions, a postgraduate journal. This is a very special day, not only because the issue is officially online, and later I will show you how to look for it on the website and download it and read it, but also because this is our first ever in-person event for Transitions, so we're all very excited. And thank you all very much for coming here today in Sapienza, and also for the ones who are connected via Zoom. So today we're gonna talk and we're gonna discuss about this fifth issue, whose title goes Fluid Boundaries, Reality and Subject at the Stand of Contemporary Humanities. And before getting to the heart of the matter, I would like to thank and also say hi to all the guests that are here today, and also the ones that are connected. So I would like to present and introduce you Valerio Monticelli and Nicolò Cesaroni. You will later see Valerio. They are the two curators of this issue. And then I would like to thank for their time and their availability, Professor Paolo Simonetti, who's here with us at Sapienza, and also the PhD student Davide Passa that is connected via Zoom. Yeah, we see you. Hi, Davide. And I would like also to thank two authors that are going to share with us a discussion about the paper they have published in this issue. And I'm talking about Costanza Mondo and Martina Di Tizio. They will later talk about their paper. So I would like to just briefly summarize what Transitions is about for all of you who haven't heard about this project or are not from Sapienza. So Transitions is a postgraduate journal, and it's completely run by students, and it's an open access journal that was conceived in 2020 during the pandemic. And the aim of this journal was to create a virtual space where scholars, but also students, could share knowledge and find an enriching and find a place where to have an enriching conversation about all the disciplines that we here at Sapienza deal with in the master programs of English and Anglo-American Studies and Scienze Linguistiche, Letterarie e della Traduzione. So to better understand what transition is about, I would like to use two adjectives. The first one is transition. Like, transition is a proper transition because it allows academic people and all the readers to just integrate what is the past with the future and integrate what is innovation with tradition, and also to cross boundaries and adopt original standpoints to discuss about all the topics we are passionate about in literature, linguistics, and all the realm of humanities. And the other word I would like to use to describe the transition is inclusivity and international, being international, because yes, we are very international, and you can see this because the language of communication that was chosen is English. That is the language of academic also, and it is inclusivity in terms of which I think is an adjective that actually goes very well with what is the theme of this issue, and then the curators are gonna explain to us what this is about. And it just welcomes new members and welcomes topics people want to discuss about. So this is our project. We're really proud of it, and we would also like to thank the academic tutors, so Yolanda Plescia and Mario Martino, for making this real, and all the students and the members, both the old ones and the new ones, that are just making this project real. Okay, so I will now leave the floor to Nicolò. So he's one of the two curators, and he's gonna give us a general overview of what all the academic and creative writings are about, just a brief summary. And but before you do this, I would like to ask you, what was the idea behind the choice of this topic that is, again, fluid boundaries, and what was the goal, what were your objectives in carrying out such a complex research? So, yes.
So, thank you, Verdiana. Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. We chose to focus on fluidity for this issue of transitions, as a way, really, as a tool to understand and to explore reality, the concepts of reality and subject within the framework of contemporary humanities. When we were deciding the theme of the issue, we started observing that nowadays reality and identity are not static or fixed entities anymore, but are flowing, are compounds of different elements that move and change over time. We know for a fact that since the postmodernist and deconstructionist critique, there is no such thing as a single absolute truth, but every account of reality is a version of reality. And
guarda, non saprei dirti onestamente, ripeto, lui non mi ha detto nulla. Ma in realtà secondo me 15 minuti passeranno veloci, è un po' come quando fai un esame.
Sorry guys, there's someone with the mic on. Could you please turn this off?
Però ecco, non lo so. Ripeto, per quanto riguarda
Gaia Maurizi, could you please turn your microphone off?
Non so proprio, non ci ho pensato a chiederla. Non ci ho pensato a chiedere.
Okay. Okay, sorry. So we are, I was saying, then at the same time, thanks to trends like gender studies, but also queer studies and post-colonial studies, the idea of a subject of an identity has become a fragmented idea rather than a single entity. And so we were well aware that nowadays reality and subject are in a way fluid, as we argue. But how, in which way? These are the questions we try to answer with this issue, of course, without claiming to arrive to any final or absolute answer, or even to any answer in general. But we really conceived this issue as a critical exercise, an exercise in critical thinking, and a call for complexity, because we are nowadays, even though we live in a world that is starts coming to terms with the fluid nature of the concepts of reality and subject, we are still witnessing some kind of generalizing and simplistic views on these concepts. So what we wanted to achieve really was firstly to open up a debate. So what is reality nowadays? What is subject? We think that we cannot liquidate these questions denying that they have a fluid nature. When we were drafting the call for submissions, it was around April, I believe. I remember that we were witnessing the worst moments of Russian military invasion on Ukraine. And at the same time, we were hearing Vladimir Putin's declaration that nothing of that was happening. So I remember I felt like urgent, that it was urgent to speak of the fluid nature, really the fluid boundary between reality and fiction, between truth and post-truth, or even between the biological gender and gender identity, because it was having, and it has concrete and actual consequences on people's lives. So, and our hope and my hope is for this issue to really add even a small but really a proactive contribution in this sense to this debate, to overcome such generalizing and anachronistic and sometimes reactionary ways of thinking. So let me briefly show you the issue. Of course, it opens with our foreword and our manifesto.
Yeah, okay. So before giving the general overview, we can show the how to reach the issue on the website. So you can just go on the website transitionsgrad.wordpress.com. And when you are here on the welcome page, you can just go issues, November issue. And here you find that one. And you can download the full issue here or manifesto forward and then all the academic and creative writings. Okay, so this is just to show you where to find the issue, and then we'll send via the chat the link. But before that, we can just go and roam around the issue. So thank you, Nicola.
Yes, thanks to you. As I was saying, it opens with our manifesto and our forward, and then we have, as usual, our academic writing section. Firstly, we encounter a paper by Andrea Qualagna about the novel The Fortunate Pilgrim by Italian-American writer Mario Puzo. It is the story of a woman who finds herself really in need to combine her traditional social role of a woman, a wife, a mother, with another new for her role, gender role, that was the one of her husband when he suddenly dies. So Andrea claims that after her husband's death, the identity of this protagonist becomes in a way fluid because it starts floating between these two poles, between these two gender roles. Of course, we are talking about gender roles, not strictly gender identity, of course. So, and it is a very interesting analysis also because it is a comparative analysis. Andrea uses the figure of Antigone to conceptualize this transition before and after the death of her husband, to conceptualize the transition of the two stages, between the two stages of her identity. Then we have Martina Di Tizio's paper about the graphic novel Mouse by Art Spiegelman. We have her here with us, so she will talk later more in depth about the paper. Then we have Costanza Mondo's paper about the novel Amnesty by Indian writer Aravinda Diga. Again, we have her here connected with us, so we will hear her talking about it. And then last but not least, we have Valerio Monticelli's paper about the representation of the transgender subject in Netflix series Tales of the City. We will hear from him too. Then we have two contributions for our creative writing section. The first one is Michela Di Nolfi's Ploughing Part 2. And it is the second part of another story published in our previous issue. And it's very interesting because it is set in a dystopic world where laughing is prohibited. So if you're interested, it's really worth it. And then to close the section, we have a short story by an American writer whose name is Don Rutledge, and which is called A Film Story. It is really a very interesting contribution because it explores the fluidity of the boundary between an actor or an actress and the role he or she plays. It is the story of two women, a mother and her daughter, who are supposed to play the roles of respectively a mother and her daughter in the same movie. but they share a troubled familiar history, so they will find out that it is not as easy as it seems, and sometimes the role they are playing may slip into their personal life, and sometimes their personal life may slip into the role they are playing, or sometimes even these two layers may differ completely. So this is briefly the issue. Thank you very much. And let me thank also all the people who are part of this project and who collaborated to this issue, especially my co-curator Valerio. It is really an honor and a pleasure to be part of it. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. And now I want to introduce you to one of our first guests, that is Professor and Researcher Paolo Simonetti. He's a professor here at Sapienza, and he teaches Anglo-American literature. Welcome. And his research interests include the connection between fiction and history in modern and contemporary narrations, with a particular attention to American literary production. Today, he's here with us to share an in-depth look at the concept of post-truth and all the diverse forms that fluidity can take in contemporary texts. So please, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. And thanks for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've been following Transitions project since its beginning, and I believe it's not only a very worthy and interesting project, but it can you hear me if I talk like this? Okay, so yes, I cannot be. Because I believe it allows a true transition between, graduate studies and postgraduate in the postgraduate world. And I believe this is very important, and especially it's important this issue that is concerned with fluidity, because as we know, since Bauman introduced the idea of liquid modernity 22 years ago, actually, we have witnessed many changes in the social and cultural panorama, but liquidity or fluidity has remained a fitting metaphor to describe our postmodern, post-truth, post-memorial world. So I believe the term was well chosen, and it is a central issue of our contemporary panorama. Especially the fact that the idea of fluidity implies a malleability of reality, the impossibility of pinpointing our contemporary reality, since of course liquids cannot hold their shape, and they are always ready to change shape, and a liquid flows, so it doesn't usually occupy a fixed space. So it also indicates, as the editors have said in their call for papers, fluidity indicates the extreme permeability of boundaries and categories. We know, Nicola has just said it has become more and more difficult to separate fiction and nonfiction, history and memory from alternative history, uchronia, and post-memory, so the manipulations and reimaginations and reinventions of reality and memory. We live in the age of adaptations, rewritings, remakes, sequels, prequels. So the consequence is that truth has become fluid and malleable too. Actually, it has always been elusive. What is truth? We don't know. But today we feel this with increasing intensity. So we coined an expression, post-truth, to indicate the idea that objective truth, proven facts, documented facts, are less important than appeals to feelings, emotion, and subjectivity. And this entails not so much a fluid reality, but a fluid way in which we understand reality. So a different approach to reality, to facts, to events. Today we are assaulted by what the editors in the Transitions Call for Submission describe as the dissolution of intrinsic meaning. better the dissolution of the idea that there can be one meaning that is inherent in any fact, event, story, and person. As we know, postmodernism has spelled the end of all master narratives, all the big stories that kept our existence together. This gave our life and history a meaning and a direction, but now we are left with a multitude of conflicting stories, stories that are no longer fixed or stable, but that are constantly changing, evolving, being rewritten in a world fluid, so fluid stories. Our beliefs are formed through the stories we hear. We trust something, we trust a fact, an event, the character of a person, the speech of a politician, a commercial, what a friend tells us. We trust it only if it constitutes a credible story, that is a good story. So, of course, we trust storytellers. Storytellers may easily convince us and let us believe whatever they want, provided they have a very good story. That's the point. Stories are, in fact, a crucial element in our understanding of self and surroundings. We live in and by a narrative construction of reality. And according to the psychologist Jerome Bruner, and this is a quotation, self is a perpetually rewritten story. We are constantly engaged in self-making narrative, and in the end, we become the autobiographical narratives by which we tell about our lives. So we are the stories we tell. And this may be something obvious, this may seem banal, but it seems that we as human beings still don't fully realize this crucial concept. We more or less consciously believe that stories are just for fun, just a pastime, a tool to escape reality, to relax ourselves, a useless game, but that's not true. Let me quote a passage from a recent book by Jonathan Gottschall, a book that's called The Story Paradox: How Our Love of Storytelling Builds Societies and Tears Them Down. He writes, humans live in a storm of stories. We live in stories all day long. We dream in stories all night long. We communicate through stories and learn from them. Without personal life stories to organize our experience, our lives would lack plot and point. We are storytelling animals, Homo fictus. Not only Homo sapiens, but Homo fictus. And what does it mean that we live in the post-truth age? It implies a change in the consideration of what is true. That is, we live in a world in which people are more likely to accept an argument based on a story, on the story that engages us, a story that makes us feel strong emotions. We know the stories are fictional, but if they engage us, if we feel something while reading, while experiencing, while watching a story, then we are conditioned, we somehow believe it. And there's a scientific reason for this, as Gottschall writes. Quotation, we consume fact-based arguments. So when an argument is, proven, well demonstrated, etc., with our defenses on high alert. We're critical and suspicious, especially when those arguments run counter to our existing emotion. Human beings don't want to change their mind. This is a fact. People don't want to be convinced of something different. So we are suspicious when we read a scientific article. On the other hand, when we're absorbed in a story, we relax our intellectual defenses. We suspend our disbelief, as Coleridge would say. And when their status as fiction is forgotten, this may well be an unconscious process. It's not something that we decide. Stories are taken as a real explanation of the world, as something other than as if constructions, and they become the objects of our belief. And that means in a post-truth age, they become reality. So stories affect our behaviors and thoughts and beliefs much more than we believed, much more than we think. We are somehow conditioned by stories. So whoever controls the better stories and spreads the better stories also controls our own behaviors. And this is something, it's scientific. Today, we are constantly rewriting and changing our stories, but most importantly, we are always changing and reshaping history, our collective story. Let's just think of how the stories we tell about the discovery and conquest of America have changed in the last 20, 25 years. History is fluid too. It changes shape in our reinterpretations of it. That is because history too, like our identities, is a fluid text. Now let me just very briefly state what a fluid text is. 20 years ago, always 20 years ago, John Bryant, an influential scholar, a Melville scholar, who came frequently at Sapienza, by the way, as a visiting professor. He gave lectures and speeches here. He also taught a course a couple of years ago. He came up 20 years ago with the idea of the fluid text as any literary work that exists in more than one version. And these versions flow from one to another. Now, he first came up with this idea when he was working on Melville's first novel, Typee, that came out in 1846. The first English edition of Typee, you know that, in the 19th century, American writers published their works in English in England to secure the copyright. And then they published them in the United States because in America, there was no copyright law. So the first English edition of Typee is considerably different from the first American edition because of many factors, especially because British editors, British publishers censored something that in America could pass, while American publishers censored other things. There was censorship, of course. And then also because there are different revisions that Melville made to the American edition that didn't come overseas because of mistakes and corrections that were added by the editors, by the printers. So the two editions, they are both first edition, first English and first American editions, are different, considerably different. For instance, let's not forget that the first English edition of Moby Dick was published without the epilogue, probably for a mistake of the printers. So readers didn't know that Ishmael, the protagonist, survived. And the reviewers asked, how is it possible that Ishmael dies and that he's telling the story? So, Now, the idea is that in the case of Typee, it's not possible to reconstruct the original true text as it was first perceived by Melville, because Melville himself conceived of it and printed it in different versions. So there's no original text. Bryant noted that writing is a process and that literary works evolves through various stages of revision in the process, from the earliest creative moments of mental transcription while the author is still thinking about the work, the moments of publication, and on to moments of adaptation in other media. So this is the idea of a fluid text. But then Bryant understood something very important. He said, hey, wait a minute. It's not only Typee that works like that. All works, because of the nature of texts and creativity, are fluid texts. Fluidity is inherent in the phenomenon of writing itself. So he challenged the tendency to treat a text as a fixed, immutable object, and thus suggested new ways of reading, new ways of interpreting and teaching literary texts. For one thing, this challenges the traditional assumption that though the texts may authorize many different interpretations, this is what I teach to students, that a single text may have many, even contradictory interpretations, but the material text itself is static, it's an object. There is only one original edition, usually the first edition. And then all multiple versions of it are corruptions, manipulations, unauthorized versions with no critical relevance. Well, that's not true. That's no longer true. In fact, every text is fluid. There's no original text, and most importantly, there's no definitive text. As Bryant writes, the only definitive text is a multiplicity of texts, or rather, the fluid text as a concept. So here we find that ideas like authenticity, authority, exactitude, singularity change in meaning. Each aspect of the fluid text provides its own set of interpretations, and this is valid for adaptations too, for rewritings, for parodies, for remakes, sequels, etc. It's an evolving, a flowing process. Bryant writes, I prefer to call these apparent instabilities and indeterminacies textual fluidities, because the surviving variant texts, when taken together, give us a vivid material impression of the flow of creativity, both authorial and editorial, that constitutes the cultural phenomenon of writing. So these are, I believe, some of the reasons why this issue of transitions is so central to our contemporary debate, because the concept of fluidity can be applied to any kind of non-graphic text, so literature, the traditional literature, but also to comics and graphic novels, as we will see with the article on Mouse. Also, it can be applied to movies and TV series, and there's another article on a TV series, documentaries, adaptations of all kinds. So such fluidity, I believe, is perfectly represented in the multiple topics of the essays included in this issue. So once again, congratulations on this beautiful achievement, and I look forward to hearing what you are going to say about these articles. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. And okay, so here now you see next to me the other curator of this issue, Valerio Monticelli. Welcome at the desk. And Valerio is also one of the author included in this issue, and later he's gonna also talk about the paper. And I would like now to turn the floor over to you so that you can go in depth into the other perspective from which to look at fluidity, that is fluidity as the loss of significance for the individual in terms of gender and sexuality, with reference to all those theories that were born in the 90s, and then they are now the accredited fields of study that we know as gender and queer studies. So feel free to take the floor.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to join Nicolò in the acknowledgements to all the team, Transitions Dream Team, and especially Maria Enrica, who has helped me a lot in the past few months. And of course, Nicolò, the best man of the match. Fluidity is an abused term. I remember that when we chose to talk about fluidity, we chose this team, the following day there was a politician who went to the newspapers and made a statement that he said that he wouldn't allow his daughter to, he wouldn't allow anyone tell his daughter that she can be fluid. And I think that that was the precise moment in which we realized that we felt the need to reappropriate scientifically of the concept of fluidity, and because it is an abused term. And in fact, there is a bit of irony, because while we were preparing the call, editing, receiving the papers and starting editing, in Italy there was the electoral campaign, which saw an explosion of reference and attacks to gender identity, fluidity. So it was there was a little bit of irony, and we know that the conservative portion of our society, and not only our society, claim that there is the so-called gender ideology, which is, of course, something that was invented relating to the gender theory. The theory that was theorized by Judith Butler in the 1990s, and according to which gender is something we perform. It's not something we are. And so it came, of course, after the post-structuralist movement, and with the deconstruction of meaning, there was also the deconstruction of identity. So identity is not something based on an essence. It's not something that can be universalized. It's just a construct. And so is gender. And this concept can apply also to post-colonial studies. And in fact, we have also a paper, Costanza Mondo's paper on post-colonial subjects. And I was wondering why this concept is perceived as a threat by the systems of power. And I think that it is because the idea of fluidity, the idea that something that moves, something that is free to move, is something that cannot be controlled. So it cannot be controlled by power. And that is why it is perceived as a threat. And we have to think about the fact that also post-colonial subjects, migrants, people are moving freely, are fluid, and they are perceived as a threat by these conservative portions and conservative parties of our societies. And that is why we put the Oxford definition, the Oxford Dictionary definition at the beginning of the foreword, that says that a fluid is something that moves freely. And so something that escapes the binary system. And so this theme is I believe that this theme is so important that for this reason, I choose to participate in this issue, not only as a curator, as you were saying, but also as an author. And in fact, I choose to write a paper on a series, a Netflix remake. And now that Professor was mentioning the fact that remake is something fluid, it came to my mind that this is the case. And this remake of a 1990s series, Tales of the City, has two main trans characters, a young trans man, Jake, and an old trans woman, Hannah. And their fluidity is here portrayed in relation to their passing experience. So the fact that they choose not to declare publicly that they are trans to strangers, for example. And I analyzed these characters in parallel because the old trans woman, Hannah, is 90 years old, and she started her transition in the 1960s. They are in San Francisco, and her passing experience is problematic because she fell in love with a policeman. And we know historically, but it is also shown in the series, that police at the time used to beat and steal from trans women, and not only, all the queer community. So she fell in love with this man and starts to live with him. And so she has to pass as a cis woman in order to be protected by him. They cannot tell the truth to the other policemen, the colleagues, etc. And when her friends find out, her trans friends find out, the problem arises. And in the present day, we witness Jake's transition, the young man. It is the 2010 and something like that. And this time he does not pass because for a matter of survival as Hannah, but he chooses to pass just because he wants to be perceived as he really feels, a man, just a man, not a trans man, forcefully. And so his passing experience is again something controversial, because it is shown that in a moment, in an historical moment, the present, in which it is more accepted to be trans, still he chooses not to pass publicly, so it is controversial. And also his sexual orientation changes, as I wrote in the paper, because when he starts the transition he is with a woman, and then he realizes that he's also attracted to men. So there is all this fluidity of changing physically, changing with intimacy, and also for his sexual orientation. But I don't want to bother too much on the paper.
Okay, thank you very much, Valerio. And okay, so following this thread, I would like to now introduce you to Dr. Davide Passa. Davide Passa is a PhD student here at Sapienza in English literature, cultures, language and translation. His academic interests include the use and translation of non-English varieties and social acts, particularly in audiovisual products, and with particular attention to fictional gender fluid varieties and how queer characters are presented on screen, but not only in audiovisual products, but also literature. Given the topic of this issue, I would like to ask Dr. Davide Passa, what were the main challenges you have encountered in dealing with gender and sexuality, and to what extent the Italian language and culture influence the literary and audiovisual translation of gender fluid varieties to the target audience?
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Verdiana, for your introduction and for this opportunity you gave to me. And congratulations on this new issue of the journal, which is really important to have and to discuss about these topics. So let me just share my screen if I can. I cannot share. It says that you have to allow me to share.
Okay. Yeah, we'll just interrupt my here. Okay. Maybe now you can.
Not yet. Okay.
Okay, now you should be able, yes, okay, we see it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so with this presentation, I would like to focus the attention on the way fluid subjectivities are rendered in literary and audiovisual translation. I will start by focusing, by discussing the differences between terms like sex, gender, and sexuality, just like Valerio did before. Then I will analyze how a genderless narrator is rendered in the Italian translation of Winterson's novel Written on the Body. Then I will move on to audiovisual translation in order to discuss how Anglophone gay speak and drag lingo have been rendered into Italian in The Simpsons. Before delving into the research itself, I would like to clarify the meaning of some keywords which we will meet. Although sex and gender are often used as synonyms by the lay people, they actually refer to two different aspects of an individual. Sex refers to chromosomes and hormones and the physical features that characterize a person as a male or a female. So we're talking about biology in this case, genetics, whereas gender refers to the cultural meaning that the sexed body assumes through a sustained set of acts. And this is Butler, Judith Butler. Gender, therefore, is not what one is, but what one does. Therefore, gender is not a rigid category, but a fluid one, whose meaning emerges in specific social contexts as it is created and recreated through human actions. Not only is performativity at the basis of gender, but also of sexuality, which refers in this case to the expression of oneself as a sexual being, as a heterosexual, homosexual, or whatever sexuality one recognizes in. The performative nature of gender and sexuality is also reflected in translation, as translators have to find strategies to make the target text perform the gender and sexuality portrayed in the source text in an adequate way. Along similar lines, Bauer claims that translation offers compelling new insights into how sexual ideas were formed in different contexts by a complex process of cultural negotiation. Therefore, translation is, among other things, a gender and sexuality constructing activity, where each culture constructs these two categories in its own way and with its own means. Written on the Body by Janet Winterson can be considered an experimental feminist novel in that the protagonist of the novel is an autodiegetic, genderless I, first-person narrator, which allows the writer to conceal the protagonist's gender. The problem in translating the novel is that English and Italian have two different gender systems. In Italian, gender is inflectional, whereas English is not regularly gender inflected. Gender in English is notional or covert, in contrast to the grammatical or overt gender in Italian. Translators, therefore, have to be very careful when rendering gender between different languages, or the more so when gender is a significant textual, as this is the case. I will organize the analysis on the basis of Chesterman's translation strategies, that is to say, syntactic or grammatical strategies which manipulate the form of the source text, semantic strategies which work at the level of the meaning of the source text, and pragmatic strategies altering the message of the source text. The figure provides a visual representation of the three groups of strategies used to cope with the source text genderless elements in the Italian translation. As is evident from the pie chart, there is a tendency to prefer syntactic and semantic strategies. Furthermore, this other picture here shows the specific translation procedures used in the target text, the main recurrent being transposition and distribution change. Transposition, in particular, refers to any change of word class. It occurs mainly from source language adjectives to target language nouns. It must be borne in mind that, unlike in Italian, adjectives are genderless in English. I'm not engaged, I'm deeply distracted. Non è il fidanzamento, è la confusione il punto. Where gender-marked translations, such as non ero, non sono, fidanzato, fidanzata, distratto, distratta, are avoided. Distribution change, on the other hand, is a change in the distribution of the same semantic components over more items. In this case, it would be an expansion, or fewer items. In this case would be a compression. In the example provided, an epicene, that is to say, a gender indefinite noun, such as essere in this case, but it could also be tipo, persona, soggetto, are added. The target language adjective agrees with the genderless epicene. I felt ridiculous, mi sentivo un essere ridicolo. Other procedures that are used to conceal the gender of the narrator are, among many others, phrase structure change, which affects the noun phrase in terms of number and definiteness, and the verb phrase at the level of person, tense, and mood. Left myself alone with the clock. Restammo soli l'orologio e io, where the first person singular subject is replaced by a first person plural one to avoid the gender marked adjective solo or sola. The use of genderless synonyms, poor me infelice. I was rigorous, ero inflessibile, instead of povero, povera, rigoroso, rigorosa. Abstraction change, which implies either a move from abstract to concrete or the opposite. We're going to be friends, sarà solo amicizia. Emphasis change, which alters the thematic focus. I am an idiot, che idiota che sono, where the word idiota is thematized to avoid the translation of the indefinite article an as un, una, or un with apostrophe. Moving on to gay speak, it is worth saying that this term was first used by Hayes in 1976. It is the linguistic variety that is allegedly used by gay men through which they construct and perform their sexuality. It is at the basis of their speech community where they can feel accepted and recognized. Ranzato states that fictional homosexuals and their fictional language are more often than not stereotyped, in fiction, of course. According to Gross, the use of stereotypes is a common practice in the process of media characterization, since characters are meant to be easily recognizable by the audience. Focusing on the Italian translation of gay speak, Ranzato acknowledges that the relative poverty of the Italian gay lexicon as compared to the richness of the corresponding English terminology is a fact. And still today, the relatively poor lexicon available is an objective obstacle even for the most unprejudiced translator. Let's now analyze the translation into Italian of some scenes selected from The Simpsons, where gay men are portrayed. John is the owner of an antiques shop. The Italian dubbing makes abundant use of emotional language and diminutives. I'm going to show you some scenes. So when showing Homer a game box, John says,
"The Rex Mars Atomic Discombobulator. Don't you just love the graphics on this box?"
No. How can you love a box or a toy or graphics? You're a grown man.
It's camp!
Okay, in the source text, John reveals his emotions using the verb to love, which seems to be quite an excessive manifestation of emotion when referring to an object. The expression of emotions is a typical characteristic of women's speech, which is shared by gay men, according to Lakoff, 1975. In the target text, the verb love is translated with the adjective entusiasmante. We will see the scene.
Così tanto.
Oh, ma questo è il discombussolatore atomico Rex Marx. Non è entusiasmante la grafica di questa scatola?
No! Come può entusiasmare una scatola, un giocattolo, una grafica? Lei è un uomo adulto, scusi, so.
È kitsch!
So the adjective entusiasmante, which could be translated as electrifying, indicates an even more exaggerated emotional response towards the object. The exaggerated show of emotions continue when John realizes that Marge's kitchen curtains are the same as the curtains he has in his bathroom.
Oh, I've got the exact same curtains only in my bathroom. Didn't you just die when you found these?
Not really. They just had corn on them. Kitchen, corn.
Oh, io ho le stesse identiche tendine, però nel bagno. Non è impazzita quando le ha trovate?
Beh, non proprio. Ci sono le pannocchie, cucina, pannocchie.
Wow!
So the verb to die used in the source text is translated as impazzire, to go crazy. They're both strong verbs, arguably used in an excessive way. A further element of gay speak is introduced in the dubbing, that is to say, the use of diminutives, tendine, instead of curtains. The term curtains is rendered with the diminutive form tendine, and Orru 2014 maintains that Italian gay speak is mainly based on two morphological peculiarities, gender inversion and the use of diminutives. Ludicrism, a further linguistic feature of gay speak, is showed by Julio, a professional photographer, hairdresser, and drag queen.
I can't do this. I can't do this.
Can't, Marge. I never want to hear Juju's the CA next Tuesday word again.
Julio is parroting Marge, and the multiplication of senses occurs in the modal verb can't, which is playfully used as the acronym of see you next Tuesday, conveying the sense of procrastination, but also the idea of the C word.
Non ce la posso fare!
Non puoi, Marge, ora basta. Puoi se vuoi e getti in on nei dimenticatoi.
In the Italian dubbing, the word play, based on the modal verb can't, which is not literally translatable into Italian, is creatively reproduced with the rhyming aphorism puoi se vuoi e getti in on nei dimenticatoi. Julio, who is also a drag queen, decides to introduce Marge to Springfield's drag scene, which is led by Queen Shantae, the Simpson version of the most popular drag queen in the world, RuPaul Charles. The kind of gender performed by drag queens has political and ideological connotations. So this is another version of gender, but in that they consider it as a parody of heteronormativity and gender binarism.
Marge, this is Queen Shantae, Barbara Streisand, the mysterious Waylon, and Fiona Adams-Apple.
Hello, squirrel friend.
You're the tallest thing I ever... and you're still getting up.
Honey, I spend half my day getting up and the other half getting down. Okay.
Marge, ti presento Queen Shantae, Barbara Streisand maschio, la misteriosa Waylon e Fiona Pomo d'Adamo.
Ciao, scoiattolina.
Oh, quanto sei alta! E ti alzi ancora!
Trascorro metà giornata a rizzarmi e l'altra a darci dentro. Mi ci ficco!
The gay icon Barbara Streisand is turned into Barbara Streisand in line with Harvey's ludicrism wordplay. In the target text, the same wordplay is conveyed with Barbara Streisand maschio, where man is translated as maschio. In addition to this, the mysterious Waylon, which is genderless in the source text, is marked as female in the target text, la misteriosa Waylon. Squirrel friend is an expression that refers to drag queens who are men that hide their nuts, this is Urban Dictionary, referring to genitalia, with duct tape, so that they're not visible. Translators have to face the fact that Italian lacks a drag lingo, and the expression squirrel friend is rendered as scoiattolina, which is marked as female in light of Harvey's gender inversion, and makes use of the diminutive ina, a typical feature of Italian gay speak. Another drag term is the interjection occur, which was invented by Laganja Estranja, one of the contestants in RuPaul's Drag Race. Since there is no equivalent expression in Italian, the translators have opted for a double entendre, which refers to the preceding verb to get down, which means to descend, but also to have sex. The double entendre originates from the fact that Marge is surprised by Queen Shantae's tallness, who replies, "I spent half my day getting up and the other half getting down." The target text compensates for the lack of drag terms by making the reference to sex explicit, as in darci dentro, which is also emphasized by the expression mi ci ficco, which replaces occur and refers to penetration. So to sum up, the lexical void that Italian translators have to face when dealing with gender fluidity, with particular reference to the translation of genderlessness, gay speak, and drag lingo, is mainly filled by the use of transposition and distribution change in the former case, as well as the increase in the use of diminutives, emotional language, and double entendre as a way to creatively convey an adequate effect in the target language and the target culture. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Passa.
Thank you.
I forgot to say that to thank Aurora Agostini, who made the wonderful cover of the issue that we have.
So moving on, thank you very much for your intervention. And now we will just dive into the issue with the last two guests that are authors. Also, Valerio Monticelli was actually curator and author of one of the articles in the issue. So I would like now to introduce you to Costanza Mondo. So the stage is all yours, and I will just give a very brief introduction. So Costanza Mondo is one of the 6 authors that contributed to this issue, and she has written this paper in which the theme of fluidity is analyzed in the context of post-colonial literature, in particular in one of Aravind Adiga's novel, Amnesty, and she deals with the concept of blue eco-criticism and investigation of fluidity in 2 main elements present in the novel, that is water and cultural identity. So please, Costanza, if you can explain better and the stage is all yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction. And most importantly, thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. Okay. So yes, my article is concerned with Arvind Aditya's latest novel, Amnesty, and it tries to connect post-colonial literature with blue eco-criticism. So you may already be familiar with eco-criticism, the land-based field of study, an interdisciplinary field of study. And I would say that blue eco-criticism is complementary to eco-criticism. Of course, it's concerned with different themes, such as the relationship between humans and bodies of water. It deals with oceanic frames of reference, and also our mediated knowledge of the ocean. So I decided to investigate Arvind Aditya's novel from the point of view of fluidity, because I think that it brings together both post-colonial literature and blue eco-criticism. So on the one hand, we have cultural identity, which is fluid, and it is something fluid and unfixed in post-colonial studies. And on the other hand, there is, of course, the fluidity of water as an element. So you may know Arvind Aditya. He's a contemporary Indian author. He won the Booker Prize in 2008 with The White Tiger. And Amnesty, his latest novel, as I said, it was published in 2020, so it's also pretty recent. And it's the story of an illegal immigrant in Sydney, whose name is Danny. He comes from Sri Lanka, and he reaches Sydney, so Australia, on a student visa. But when that expires, he automatically becomes an illegal immigrant. So he works as a house cleaner. He's very well organized, very orderly, but every day he strives to be as invisible as possible because of the Australian immigration policy, according to which any citizen can report potential illegal immigrants by calling a phone number. And needless to say, then he does not want to be discovered, because otherwise he would be deported back to Sri Lanka. So his situation is that is further complicated by a murder. He has to make a difficult decision, so it's not easy for him to be there in Sri Lanka, in Australia, sorry, also because of this. So my article mainly investigates cultural identity in this novel, paired with the fluidity of water, because while I was reading the novel, I perceived the strong connection between the fluidity of water and that of cultural identity. So the article is basically about three main areas. So the first one is the very opening of the novel, which in my opinion draws this comparison between water and identity from the very beginning. So the novel opens with a description of the Batticaloa lagoon. So Batticaloa is in Sri Lanka, Danny's birthplace. So, I mean, the novel describes its shimmering waters, and it's actually a memory that Danny has. And then very suddenly, after a few pages, the scene changes in terms of setting and time. So now we are in Sydney, and then he's being asked a question, which is very interesting because, of course, it is related to his cultural identity. So a passersby is asking him, "What are you?" So, of course, it might make reference to the fact that his cultural identity is difficult to pin down, because Sri Lanka may be considered as the basis of his cultural identity, but he also builds on it. He acquires new threats, and we see it as the novel develops. The second area of my article instead deals with water strength and also some possibly destructive elements of water, because there is the reference in the novel to the tsunami of 2004, which, as you may know, violently struck Sri Lanka. And well, the tsunami and the Indian Ocean are the setting of another memory, which is very important for Danny, and which allows him to make a very difficult decision, which is related to his identity. So, as I said, his situation in Sydney is complicated because of a murder. He knows the identity of the murderer, but if he reports him to the police, I mean, he will be discovered and deported back to Sri Lanka. So, of course, this decision he has to make is, in my opinion, informed by the memory related to the tsunami from his experience there, because he helped to bring provisions to the people after the catastrophe. And of course, again, we have the fluidity of water on the one hand, and then his identity, his cultural identity, which is fluid because it is informed by Sri Lanka, but it changes when he's in the Australian context. And yeah, lastly, as a third aspect, I investigated whether this connection between water and identity and their fluidity might entail possible drawbacks or negative aspects. When we think of water, we think of change in general, and that can be positive. But I mean, water can also be related to precariousness or instability. And there are certain episodes in the novel, in particular certain scenes, where Danny tends to look at himself through other people's eyes. And he even tries to adhere to certain labels, I would say, or monikers that people give him. So from that perspective, I mean, it's intriguing to see how this connection can also involve drawbacks. But all in all, I mean, all things factored in, I concluded that this connection, this fluidity, which is cultural, but it's also related to water, there is this parallel, is extremely important for him. It's paramount and it is positive. So exactly like water, which flows, and it can take different shapes depending on the riverbed or the vessel or recipient in which it is poured, then he acquires new traits. So as I said, he builds on his Sri Lankan roots, but by the end of the novel, one can perceive that he, well, with respect to some issues, he's more Australian than many other Aussies, which is the slang term used to indicate Australians, and it frequently crops up in the novel. And I can say that in my opinion, he isn't a fully fledged Australian because he himself lists the characteristics of Australians from his perspective. So they are very logical, they are well organized, very orderly, and these features belong to Danny since the very beginning of the novel, I would say. And at the end of the novel, when he makes this choice, which is very important, I would say that he is even more Australian because of the choices he makes, which echoes the behavior of another character. So yes, so this is what my article is about. I really hope that you'll find it interesting. And I wanted to thank you also for your attention.
Thank you very much, Costanza. And okay, so moving on. I would like to call here at the desk because the other author we invited is here with us at Sapienza, and I'm talking about Martina Di Tizio. And I'll show on the screen, she's approaching. There she is. Oh yeah. So now you'll see her. Okay, perfect. Come here. So she'll talk about another academic writing. The second, actually, she published with Transitions. She published another one in the previous issue. Her academic paper deals with the work Mouse by Art Spiegelman and I'm quoting, fallacious storytelling of one of the characters that help us identify 3 different levels of separation between what is fact, what is history, and what is the narration of one of the characters. But Martina Di Tizio will tell us more about the paper. So,
all right, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, first of all, I want to thank you, the people who have edited this paper. Thank you very much. It was a long journey. And I want to say that the idea for this paper, of course, came to me when I was following Professor Simonetti's course, as one of the books that we were supposed to read was Mouse by Art Spiegelman. And so it is interesting because when I read the call, that was talking about the fluid boundaries between reality, fiction, truth, objective truth, and individual experience, I thought that the story that is told within Mouse it fits very well with this topic because on one end, it is a story about a Holocaust survivor. If you haven't read Mouse, it's basically Art Spiegelman telling about himself trying to tell the story of his father, who was a Holocaust survivor. And this is the story, is someone telling someone else's story. And thus my my paper was interested in the so to speak, we can say that it's about the difficulties in telling someone's story when this story doesn't really reflect reality as we know it. And in this case, Spiegelman, this is obviously the, of course, if you read Maus, it's one of the main topics of the graphic novel. But I thought that he uses different experiences. He uses, of course, in the narrative, he makes it clear that there is something not exactly right in when Vladek, Art's father, tells his story. We know that he raises some doubts in some points. Then we also have, of course, the graphic aspect of it, because we know that the present is usually in these really boxy panels, really standard, all the same. And then we have these elongated panels when it comes to the past. So it's more of a narration, of a story. But then also I started realizing when I was reading it that one of the cool things about comic books, graphic novels, and one can think, oh, but this happens also with books. But in reality, it's so different with books, because there's also the editorial aspect of rendering someone's speech on paper without making it disruptive to the reading itself. And the bubbles of Vladek were always mostly in broken English when it's in the present. But that doesn't happen in the past. So I thought, oh, okay, this is interesting. And then I came across Nancy K. Miller in her essay. She talks about the fact that in the tapes that Art Spiegelman recorded of his father talking, he didn't have that broken accent. He had a slight accent, but not as broken as it's made in the story. And because Spiegelman will talk about this, because he focuses on the fact that in translation, when he talked to the German translator, the Israeli translator, he always had such difficulties letting them or making them translate Vladek's idiolect, as I call it, because it's we will see why, in an equal way, in an equal broken way. It was always met with resistance because it doesn't exist in Hebrew, or no, it sounds anti-Semitic in Germany, so they won't do it. And he was really adamant about it. And so I dived into the question of language. Why does he use this broken accent for Vladek? And I thought, okay, because he's an immigrant, he's a Polish immigrant, so that's why he has a broken accent. But the reality is that all the other characters who share the same background don't have the same accent. So it was made on purpose. And my paper delves into the fact that this the choice of this idiolect to showcase this idiolect is mostly because he wants to show that his father, or Vladek's character, is an unreliable narrator. So there's something about him that we cannot trust entirely. And also, secondly, the fact that for most of the comic book, it's Art who tries to guide his father's own memories into a way that is into like a storyline, into something that is readable. Because thinking about it, he's trying to, it's a, how do you say, commodification of his father's own tragedy, own trauma. He's trying to make it also kind of, also, of course, as a tale that it can be told, but also as a way to make a comic book, and therefore maybe to make money. So he has to be readable, has to be accessible. And that's the problem, because traumatic memories cannot be that easily accessible. And thus, I argue that because Spiegelman showcases this broken accent, is a broken accent that mirrors a broken memory. So of course it cannot be fluid and it's standard English as we all would like to read, so that it's easy and fluid and it's really easy to read. That's not the case here because it's impossible to reproduce in a easily consumable way. And third is the aspect that because it's told in this broken accent, it means that it's an individual story. It cannot be told as a collective tale, and it's unique, especially because it's told in this broken accent. It's this very individual broken accent, and therefore it's a contrast between his story and collective history. And I thought it was really, it was an interesting aspect of the whole comic book, who of course has other aspects in it. But this one I was really interested in. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martina, for your contribution and for explaining your paper. I would also like to thank one of the other authors that contributed to this issue that is connected via Zoom, and it's Don Rutledge. Thank you very much for making it here, since I know you're connected from the US. So thank you very much for your patience. If you feel like saying something about the paper, just feel free to do it. Otherwise, we can we will invite you all to read the entire issue and the entire contributions.
Yeah, I mean, I could say a quick word or two, if that's okay. Yeah, so I originally got reached out by Isabella about this, and she's like, do you have anything that would be for this issue? And I said, yes, hopefully, maybe. I have an idea knocking around. And so I read the theme, and the first thought I had was the film TV industry where I work in. And so, you know, because so much about the fluidity of like what a film set is and what is purported through the camera and everything is not really the reality of what these people actually are. And, you know, you get that in a realistic aspect whenever you talk to certain actors or talk to people on set. So I wanted to write about that. And, you know, there's a lot of, I would say, identities and what it means to be a certain person in regards to the, you know, the yoga instructor, the main actress, the mother. So yeah, I just wanted to write about it. Took me a while, a couple drafts, quite a few drafts, but I finally got it, and I'm super happy with the result. And thank you so much for having me with the journal. I really appreciate it.
It was our pleasure, Don. Thank you all. Thank you very much for spending a few words on it. So yeah, we got to the end of this event, but before you all disconnect and you all go out of this room, I would only want to remind all of you, and if you want to pass this info on to friends or whoever could be interested in this project, we would like to say that a call for applicants for the HR team is gonna be open tomorrow morning. So feel free to go and browse our website. That you can just type on Google Transition a Postgraduate Journal, and you'll find everything under the announcements tag. And yeah, the HR team is basically our administrative office at Transition. So it is responsible for all the communication within the Transition team and between Transition and the external institutions that want to be involved, the scholars that want to be involved, but also between Transitions at Sapienza itself. And it of course, it hires new members. So you will have an interview with them. So the people that will join the HR team will be also responsible for the interviews. And they are all dealing with all the administrative duties, like also converting the hours you will spend in Transitions project into credits. Because another thing that could be motivating for, I don't know, people graduating is that participating in Transition can also award you some credits specifically 4 credits if you're enrolled in a master's degree and 3 credits if you are enrolled in the bachelor degree. And I'm talking about English and Anglo-American Studies and Scienze Linguistiche, Letterarie e della Traduzione. So if you're interested, if I convinced you, just go and check our website tomorrow morning and you'll find all the information. Thank you all very much for being here today, and sorry for the closing and connecting again, but this is just going live. And thank you all very much for the people who were here today in this room, for the guests, again, to the curators, Valerio Monticelli and Nicolò Cesaroni. Congratulations for this new issue. We made it. And thank you to the guests, Paolo Simonetti, Professor Paolo Simonetti, and PhD student Davide Passa, and to the authors who shared a discussion about their papers. So Martina Di Tizio, Costanza Mondo, and Don Rutledge. Thank you all very much, and go and read this issue because it's amazing. And I'm not saying this because I edited part of it, but it's amazing. So thank you again.
Grazie.